Tijuana Press Week in Review. I'm Matthew Bowler from the San Diego-Tijuana border crossing. This week, he is facing accusations that he tortured suspects in his custody. However, it's important to keep in mind that killings are down over 50% when compared to the same time period from last year. At this barbershop, the State of the Union is more than just background. After 30 years of incessant war, opium is a keystone of the Afghan economy. Now, nearly any one of us can go online and buy stock in Corrections Corporation of America, owning your very own piece of a prison. Is given much of the credit for making Tijuana a safer place. A couple is under arrest and accused of using Facebook to lure a victim to rob and kill. The question remains, does Afghanistan have this time? Matt Bowler, Fox 5 News.
Investigation into a brutal prison beating in Idaho continues this morning. We showed you the surveillance video yesterday. Well, it turns out the prison is run by Corrections Corporation of America. That company also operates a prison in Otay Mesa with a very unique specialty. Matthew Bowler takes us inside for an exclusive look.
After they're arrested, illegal immigrants come here. And it's not a country club, but it's not quite a prison.
In no ways is this a punitive process. This is purely detaining while we determine what we're going to do with them in their immigration proceedings.
You see, technically, this is what's called administrative detention. 700 beds here are for undocumented immigrants, and the remaining 500 beds are for non-violent criminals. As we walk through for this first ever look inside, we have over a dozen escorts in tow. They take their public image very seriously.
This agency is a transparent agency. This administration has insisted on it.
That doesn't mean that the detainees enjoyed their stay. After 4 months in custody, Juan Gomez is now living at his San Diego home with his family, awaiting a decision. For him, life inside was difficult.
Mucha prepotencia.
Lots of attitude. And one other thing. One time, everyone in my pod was given kitchen duty, and we didn't get back to our cells until 2 in the morning.
Here in San Diego, immigrants are detained at a private for-profit prison in Otay Mesa. Now, nearly any one of us can go online and buy stock in Corrections Corporation of America, owning your very own piece of a prison. Now, not everyone is happy with this.
I would like to see their rights protected, and even illegal aliens have rights under the Constitution. So, to be entrusted to an agency that is private, that is worrisome.
Leah Horowitz has over 30 years of experience in immigration law. She does not want prisons to be run by for-profit businesses. But even Leah admits,
it seems to have worked in this situation, but in this particular city.
And ICE insists.
I know that we're providing a safe, secure environment for these detainees while they're undergoing immigration.
But Juan Gomez wonders if the money could be better spent.
More 1,200 people. For each 180, it's a lot of money spent the government to CCA.
Matt Bowler, Fox 5 News.
So far this year, the Mexican newspaper La Reforma is reporting upwards of 4,000 deaths as a result of Mexico's war with the drug cartels. And recently under arrest are nearly 60 current and former Tijuana police officers. How is this affecting Tijuana, and how does this affect San Diego? Fox 5 video journalist Matt Bowler finds out.
There are very few San Diegans in Tijuana these days. No shopping or eating. The streets are empty. Tijuana's violent reputation scares away many day trippers.
I think the real tourism killer for Baja California has been the violence.
And that's what Tijuana's police chief, Julian Lezeola, wants to change. He believes Tijuana is safe.
I can tell you, as the one in charge of security, that Tijuana is safe for visitors.
Many give Chief Lezeola credit for cleaning up the city's police force and its streets. He says over 520 officers have been removed for engaging in what he calls inappropriate activities.
I remember that in 2008, in early 2008, I had up to 10 complaints daily.
The chief says things are very different today.
Definitely, I can state to you at this time that it has been a long time, maybe a year or more perhaps, that I do not receive a complaint by a foreign citizen.
Dr. Shirk does give Lezeola credit for a job well done.
Lezeola has taken a very tough stand. My sense is that the number of criminal complaints probably has gone down from American citizens, primarily because the number of American citizens going into Baja California has dropped dramatically.
Baja wants them back. According to Dr. Shirk, Tijuana and San Diego's economy are really part and parcel.
Fortunately or unfortunately, we're in the same boat together. What happens to Tijuana affects San Diego and vice versa.
Lezeola wants San Diegans to understand that TJ, like any other city, has its crime, but he believes it's under control.
Tijuana actualmente es una ciudad.
Tijuana is today just like any other cosmopolitan city. It has its problems. Of course it has, just like any other city. But it's also true that TJ is an option in as much for visiting, for diversion, for investment, or it can simply be a place to have fun.
Matthew Bowler, Fox 5 News. Afghanistan. After 30 years of incessant war, opium is a keystone of the Afghan economy. According to the World Bank, opium production, sale, and smuggling amount for 1/3 of the Afghan economy. The UN's International Security Assistance Force, or ISAF, says this money is used to support the insurgency.
ISAF recognises the link between the narcotics trade and the money that provides the insurgency, specifically at the tactical and the operational level. The insurgency will use the money and the drugs and help them ship and transport the drugs out of the country and use the same people to bring weapons back into the country.
Opium, the money and weapons it brings to the insurgency, are a major strategic concern for military commanders. The local government is beginning to use a two-pronged approach to deal with this problem.
A great example is in Helmand, where Governor Mangal combined the threat of eradication with the opportunity for the farmers to grow alternative seeds, for example wheat.
Chopping off the head of the insurgency's financial snake by arresting the drug kingpins is one approach NATO is taking to combat the rebellion.
Arresting individuals, arresting the kingpins of the drug trafficking, especially those who, with their activity, with the revenue they generate, fund insurgency.
This approach is not without its controversy. The World Bank report on Afghanistan's opium economy says that corruption is stunting the effort to arrest opium kingpins.
There's certainly anecdotal evidence that they make a payoff so that either they're not arrested or their stocks are returned to them. And in addition, there's indications that when opium is seized from traders, the stocks are actually sold on rather than being destroyed.
Targeting drug traffickers and convincing farmers to grow legal crops is part of the strategy to remove the threat of violence the illegal drug business brings to Afghanistan and the entire world. However, success is best measured in years.
It's going to take time to get rid of this scourge on Afghanistan, measured in the decades rather than in the months or years.
The question remains, does Afghanistan have this time? There are very few San Diegans in Tijuana these days. No shopping or eating. The streets are empty. Tijuana's violent reputation scares away many day trippers.
I think the real tourism killer for Baja California has been the violence.
And that's what Tijuana's police chief, Julian Lezeola, wants to change. He believes Tijuana is safe.
Porque estoy encargado de la seguridad.
I can tell you, as the one in charge of security, that Tijuana is safe for visitors.
Many give Chief Lezeola credit for cleaning up the city's police force and its streets. He says over 520 officers have been removed for engaging in what he calls inappropriate activities.
Yo recuerdo en el 2008
I remember that in 2008, in early 2008, I had up to 10 complaints daily.
The chief says things are very different today.
Definitivamente.
Definitely, I can state to you at this time that it has been a long time, maybe a year or more perhaps, that I do not receive a complaint by a foreign citizen.
Dr. Shirk does give Lezeola credit for a job well done.
Lezeola has taken a very tough stand. My sense is that the number of criminal complaints probably has gone down from American citizens, primarily because the number of American citizens going into Baja California has dropped dramatically.
Baja wants them back. According to Dr. Shirk, Tijuana and San Diego's economy are really part and parcel.
Fortunately or unfortunately, we're in the same boat together. What happens to Tijuana affects San Diego and vice versa.
Lezeola wants San Diegans to understand that TJ, like any other city, has its crime,
but he believes it's under control.
Tijuana actualmente es una ciudad.
Tijuana is today just like any other cosmopolitan city. It has its problems. Of course it has, just like any other city. But it's also true that TJ is an option in as much for visiting, for diversion, for investment, or it can simply be a place to have fun.
Matthew Bowler, Fox 5 News.
Hello and welcome to the Tijuana Press Week in Review. I'm Matthew Bowler from the San Diego-Tijuana border crossing. This week, a kidnapping gang is stopped, questions still surround Tijuana's old police chief, and Tijuana tries to break a Zumba world record. This is the Tijuana Press Week in Review. A former policeman is under arrest and accused of running a kidnapping gang in Tijuana. Reportedly, 28-year-old Martin Garcia Nieto and his gang of kidnappers tricked a Tijuana locksmith and his employees into going to a safe house. At the safe house, the men were tied up and a 100,000 peso ransom demand was issued. If not paid, it was said that their heads would be delivered to their shop. Tijuana's anti-kidnapping task force was contacted, and in a sting operation, they were able to arrest Garcia Nieto and rescue the victims. Here's the Deputy Attorney General.
El detenido Martín Nieto García será puesto a disposición del juez penal en turno para que responda por el delito de secuestro agravado que se le imputa, en tanto que la unidad antisecuestros continúa la investigación para lograr la ubicación y detención de sus otros dos cómplices, los cuales se encuentran plenamente identificados.
The gang is thought to be responsible for other kidnappings, and two of them remain at large. Last week, Tijuana Press reported that there are several Mexican soldiers under arrest and accused of working for drug cartels. Reportedly, while working at a checkpoint south of Ensenada, the soldiers were helping the cartel ship cocaine. Now the Mexican military confirms that there is an investigation.
Esta situación solamente implica dos cosas. Aquel que se mete dentro de la delincuencia organizada solamente tiene dos destinos. Se va a la cárcel o lo mata.
The commander also says that along with the soldiers, a group of civilians are also under investigation. Many Mexican media outlets are reporting that the former Tijuana police chief, Julian Lezeola, will be taking over the police chief's office in Juarez, Mexico. However, Tijuana Press's managing editor Vicente Calderon spoke with the mayor of Juarez, and he says there are no changes on the horizon for his police force. Julian Lezeola is an internationally known lawman thought to be responsible for quelling the violence that rocked Tijuana in the early part of this century. And many want to think he can do the same for the beleaguered citizens of Juarez. And questions of torture continue to follow Lezeola. He is facing accusations that he tortured suspects in his custody. Mexico's Human Rights Commission is asking the Baja State Congress to respond to the accusations.
Pues no recuerdo yo exactamente el nombre de él, pero ahí están, en todo caso, incluidos los datos correspondientes, ¿no?
Because the Human Rights Commission is raising the questions of the abuses, the Baja Attorney General is required to open an investigation. However, there is no confirmation yet that an investigation has begun. And finally this week, the citizens of Tijuana are trying to break a Zumba world record. Zumba is an exercise that combines Latin dance and aerobics. Tijuana is trying to break a Guinness Book of World Record for the most Zumba dancers in a single Zumba marathon. Tijuana's Tourist Bureau is hoping that just making the attempt will show that Tijuana is a safe and fun place to visit. And for more information on this or any of the other stories you heard here, please go to TijuanaPress.com. From the San Diego-Tijuana border, I'm Matthew Bowler. Hello and welcome to this week's Tijuana Press Week in Review. I'm Matthew Bowler from the San Diego-Tijuana border crossing. This week, Tijuana politics heats up. Tijuana's past police chief will take over in Juarez. We sat down with Dr. David Shirk from the Transborder Institute. This is Tijuana Press Week in Review. A new wave of violence shatters a period of calm in Tijuana. 8 people are shot dead in several different Tijuana neighborhoods. Last Saturday, a man in his 30s is found beaten and shot dead. A 47-year-old is found bound, gagged, and stabbed. The bodies of a man in his late 30s and a woman in her early 20s are found dumped in the streets, and a 44-year-old is shot dead on the east side of town. Then, last Sunday, in a parking lot, a man is found dead in his car after being shot in the head. Then, last Monday, 2 more men are found shot dead. However, it's important to keep in mind that killings are down over 50% when compared to the same time period from last year. Well, now it's official. Julian Lezaola, the former police chief of Tijuana, will become the next police chief in Juarez. Lezaola is given much of the credit for the drop in violence that Tijuana has experienced. Many questions still surround his time in Tijuana and the future in Juarez.
I think the worst possible scenario is that Lezaola got lucky in Tijuana and had no real effect in reducing the violence. And if he winds up going to Ciudad Juarez, he may be completely a fish out of water and very quickly find himself on the wrong end of a gun.
Now that the dust has settled on Tijuana's new mayoral administration, the politics are heating up. In a press conference, Tijuana's current mayor, Carlos Bustamante, accused Tijuana's previous mayoral administration of management irregularities. He also says that the Tijuana Police Department is going to lose nearly 124 million pesos in funding.
Reformas a la ley de alcoholes pasando por encima de la Constitución y vulnerando la autonomía municipal. Ahora intenta desviar la atención de esa grave intromisión, pretendiendo engañar a la población con publicidad pagada, en lugar de hacer frente a una controversia constitucional interpuesta, como es mi obligación, en defensa de los tijuanenses y la autonomía de su gobierno.
Many of Tijuana's politicos are wondering if Bustamante is trying to set up the previous administration and its political party as a fall guy for the challenges that his administration is and will face.
This report is actually the second report that we've done. Back in 2010, we did a roundup to look at the previous year and see what were the patterns of violence that we saw throughout Mexico, and trying to classify drug-related violence and separate it out from ordinary homicides. This report that came out in January is the summation of the research we've done over the last 4 years, looking at drug-related violence, but drawing on new government data that tracks drug-related violence at the municipal level since the beginning of the Calderon administration, from December 2006 to the present, is that the violence is heavily concentrated in really just a very small number of municipalities and states. The vast majority of the violence is concentrated in just 4 or 5 states, and 80% of the violence is concentrated in less than 100 municipalities in Mexico. So out of 2,400 or so cities around the country, only 100 of those cities are affected by severe forms of violence. Most of those are not large, important cities in Mexico, but rather small producer and transit cities for drug trafficking. The report focuses on Tijuana as a case where violence peaked up very dramatically in 2008, but died down over the last 2 years. 2009 and 2010, we saw relatively lower levels of violence than we saw in the peak year, 2008. At the same time, the levels of violence we're seeing now in Tijuana, 400 or so killings a year, would arguably be totally unacceptable to people in Tijuana 10 years ago, when you were looking at homicide rates of maybe 100 or 200 homicides in the city. Things are much worse now than they were 10 years ago, but they're much better than they were, significantly better than they were 2 or 3 years ago in Tijuana. What appears to have happened in Tijuana, from what we can tell, is that while the Sinaloa cartel and its affiliates were previously fighting with the Tijuana-based Arellano Felix organization, that conflict somehow came to an end, and either they resolved their differences or they agreed somehow to call a truce. And now the Sinaloa cartel seems to have very significantly increased or expanded operations in Tijuana that previously weren't there. We know that because in November and December of this year, we found tunnels and other activity by the Sinaloa cartel on a scale that we had never seen before. So on one measure, perhaps we've seen success. On the other measure, I think we continue to see problems with drug trafficking moving through Tijuana, and that raises a lot of questions about whether all of that bloodshed and all of that effort was in vain. I think one thing that's really important to keep in mind when we talk about Tijuana, we talk about Mexico in general, is that when we talk about this violence, we're talking about violence that tends to be very targeted. And it's the tendency in the United States when looking at this violence has been to say, oh, there's terrible violence going on in Mexico, we shouldn't go there. And in the next couple of weeks, as we have spring break coming about, there's a lot of pressure on parents and schools to make a decision about should they send their kid to Mexico. The reality is that there have been no incidents that I know of, as bad as the violence has been in the last 4 years, in which spring breakers or students traveling in Mexico have been seriously jeopardized by this violence. We have to keep violence in perspective. We have to recognize that your odds of being killed by a drug trafficker in Mexico generally are about the same as your odds of being killed on a U.S. freeway in an automobile accident. So if you're not afraid to drive your car, you shouldn't be afraid to go to Mexico or go to Tijuana.
For more, please go to TijuanaPress.com. I'm Matthew Bowler.